Hi there. Welcome to the Pine Lily chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society's presentation. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention we do field trips each month with an expert guide so you can learn about native plants, be out in nature. This Saturday, August 28th at 9 a.m., we have an expert, Sandy Webb, who's going to lead a walk along the St. Cloud lakefront. We'll be meeting at 9 a.m. at the West Pavilion parking lot on the west side of the walkway along the lakefront. Make sure you wear shoes that can get wet and bring some water and a hat, and hope you'll join us for that nature walk. So tonight's presentation is by Deborah Green. Deborah Green has been a leader in the Florida Native Plant Society and the Audubon Society for many years. She's been the sustainability director for Valencia College and has held a lot of leadership positions in the conservation initiatives for Central Florida. She's written conservation policy and has written several books. And we are pleased to have here today Deborah Green. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Karina, for the nice introduction and for inviting me. And my topic, it's a favorite topic of mine currently, is plants for birds, the caterpillar connection. And before I get into it, I'd like to pose this question and you answer in the chat. Why are we into native plants? Could be many, many reasons. Anybody want to say a reason right off? If nobody in the chat says anything, Valerie and Karina, what you could say why you are into native plants?
Okay. Yep.
Well,
nobody's in the chat yet.
I think the first and foremost, is to feed wildlife, and then secondarily to beautify our landscapes.
Okay, that's great. How about you, Val?
On hikes, so it's something you can go and you can exercise, and you still have something like really interesting to look at. And there's so many of them to learn that you really get a good context of where you're at in Florida.
Right. Well, I wanted to point out that, and by the way, this is the ruby-throated hummingbird on coral honeysuckle, that in different stages of my life, I've been into natives for different reasons. When I was a grad student in entomology in the 70s, it was because you would not need pesticides if you planted these plants. The idea was that they have their own insects on them, but they would never get out of control. They have their predators on them and so forth. So that was a motivator for me for many, many years. And then I had an opportunity to work in water conservation in Volusia County for 9 years. And there my motivation was they should be more drought tolerant. If you put them in the right place, then you'll need water only for establishment. This is part of my landscape, as was the last one. And now my big motivation is for the birds, because birds are really in trouble. This graph from a 2019 seminal paper in Science magazine shows the decline in bird populations since 1970 over the last 50 years, 2.9 billion birds down. That's 30% down from 1970 levels. And of course, 1970 probably was way down from previous, but this is the data that they had, citizen science and ornithological data. So that's my topic here, how the birds connect to the plants, the caterpillar connection. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to frame this that this is a talk I've given several times now, and you might be surprised at the way it flows. I want to first talk about the birds, then the caterpillars, and finally the plants that are best for the caterpillars. Okay, fall and spring migration are exciting times of the year for birders. This is one of our walks at Mead Botanical Gardens. I believe it's a spring walk. We do them every weekend in April and every weekend in October. This was pre-COVID, obviously. But we're all looking up and we're looking for warblers, these tiny little, gorgeous little birds, 4.5 inches. And there are 37 species in the eastern United States of warblers, and they pass through Florida going north or south to the tropics. About 3 species breed in our area, but most are just passing through. And these beautiful photos are by Frank Salmon, who's one of our members who caught the bug for warblers while going to Mead Gardens with our group. And our warblers are thought to be originally tropical. And what's the evidence? That they spend 2/3 of the year in the tropics. And also that there are many, many more species of warblers in the tropics. So, and this is an old rendering of some of the tropical warblers. But this annual migration north and south is very dangerous. So I'm going to try to establish why they do it. They fly at night. They use landmarks. Well, they use innate ability to read the stars and landmarks like lakes and tree cover. But it's dangerous. They are going at night. They avoid some of the turbulence of the day and they avoid the hawks. But it is still very dangerous. Now, many species winter in the Caribbean here, like these on the left and this black-throated blue. It breeds right in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Cuba. And the yellow is its migration path and the orange is its breeding area. So that's not far to hip hop to get from the islands up to the States. But many others winter in Central America or northern part of South America. So how do they get back to the United States? They have 2 possibilities, one Circum-Gulf and the other Trans-Gulf. And if it's Trans-Gulf, they hit storms going across the 600-mile Gulf of Mexico, and they may fall on oil rigs or ships. There's plenty of collection of those. Ornithologists are posted on oil rigs sometimes. And of course, many just fall into the water. Very dangerous. And the Circum-Gulf migrants must cross the largest desert in North America, the Chihuahuan Desert. So what's the reward for the risk of these dangerous semi-annual flights? It is the forests of the eastern United States, when they leaf out, have caterpillars eating the leaves. Caterpillars, little Microlepidoptera, little caterpillars rolling the leaves and eating particularly the new leaves, many different species. Caterpillars are perfect food for nestlings of these warblers. Now, caterpillars have exoskeletons like all insects, but they're not hardened, like visualize a beetle. So very easy, first of all, for a warbler to pick out with its sharp little bill and stuff it down a nestling's gullet. So they're absolutely perfect. And the warblers have evolved in concert with them. Caterpillars are rich in carotenoids from the plants, and this may be the source of some of the colors of the warblers. This was mentioned by Doug Tallamy. So songbird migration is timed with the spring leafing out of the deciduous forest. And if you hadn't heard that concept, I'll tell you where I learned it, from this book, Living on the Wind, Across the Hemisphere with Migratory Birds by Scott Weidensaul, who's just a brilliant, wonderful, beautiful writer. And this book was a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 2000. And we have, Orange Audubon has Scott coming this January 21st to talk about his new book, something about the wind. I can't remember exactly the title. I haven't read it yet. They're very dense. So how do the moths overwinter? There's 4 stages of a moth: egg, larvae, pupae, and adult. And any of those stages might be the one that overwinters. But the toughest stage is the pupa. So as in this gypsy moth, you see here's the adult that comes out of the pupa in the early spring and lays the eggs. And then the eggs hatch and you've got your little caterpillars. So that caterpillar hatch is timed with the emergence of the new leaves and the deciduous trees. And it's not only the deciduous trees, conifers have new growth and caterpillars too. So to review this concept, warblers and other songbirds need caterpillars to feed their young. And caterpillars can be a source of sustenance for an adult warbler in migration as well. This picture, it was taken at Fort DeSoto Park by a friend of ours. It's just a black and white warbler eating a caterpillar for food along the migration path. Now, everybody's familiar with berries for food, and they're important in winter and in migration to sustain birds, but it's not the food that you would feed your nestlings. So I hope everybody's getting this idea. And going back to the 2.9 billion birds gone in 50 years, each group of birds, the shorebirds, the grassland birds, have a different story. And I wrote it out in this op-ed, Reducing Lawns, Adding Native Plants Could Help Dwindling Bird Populations, which Valerie's going to put in the chat if you want to check that out. I'm going to focus on the songbirds and the forests. The forests have decreased since the European settlers came to the New World. From the 1600s, they've been cutting down forests and continuing. It just continues and continues. In Brazil, you know about the cutting of the Amazon, and then fires. Mato Grosso had the highest number of fires in the Brazilian Amazon in 2020. So what can you do to help songbirds? Plant the best trees for caterpillars, in addition to trees and shrubs with berries. Learn to live with caterpillar damage on your plants. Use no pesticides. And reduce your lawn and change the palette of plants in your yard to plants that foster caterpillars, the native plants of your area. And you may have heard this before if you've watched any of the videos of Doug Tallamy or read his books. And if you haven't, I'll tell you about them. Bringing Nature Home was the first, well, it wasn't his first book, but it was his bestseller from 2007. And in it, he makes this point that I'm making, that songbirds need caterpillars. And he's an entomologist specializing in Lepidoptera caterpillars. And if you ever watch one of his videos, you'll see he learns them, he collects them and identifies them, and he's a real entomologist. Then the new book that came out a year ago, Nature's Best Hope, in it, he says, it's not enough to just grow your own native plants at your own house. And by the way, this is why I got over my shyness about talking about it and started trying to present. And I'm showing off my yard and everything. I'm over my shyness because he has pointed out that birds are in trouble. And we've got to not only grow our own, but teach about it and get our neighbors to do it and make a homegrown national park. And why? Because only 5% of the land surface of the North America is in parks and preserves, which is no way enough to preserve biodiversity. 41% is agriculture, but most of that is monoculture, not suitable to maintain populations of birds that would be in that habitat, like the grassland birds. And 54% is in urban and suburban. So that's the proportion, that's the part that we have to attack and try to change the way of landscaping away from lawns to diverse native landscapes. And by the way, he also points out that for moths, you got to turn off the outdoor lights when not in use because they are attracted to lights, add motion sensors to security lights, and install yellow bulbs. They attract them less than white bulbs. And if we all did this, we would save billions of moths and other beneficial insects every year. And I'm not like Tallamy. I have a degree in entomology, but I'm a lazy entomologist. I don't collect the larvae, and you have to rear them out to get the adults. The larvae don't have that many distinguishing characters. So it's quite a commitment. And when I've found larvae that I wanted to get identified, and I've sent them to where you're supposed to send them, which is the Division of Plant Industry in Gainesville. I know once the entomologist in charge of the Lepidoptera was out of town for a period, and by the time they got there, they had molded and so forth. So it's quite a project. I want to introduce, though, and maybe some of you know, Julieta Brambilla. Do you know her, Valerie? Okay, she's a native plant aficionado as well, but she's an entomologist, and she's got the job there at the Division of Plant Industry of taking in insects for identification and farming them out to the experts. So if you really want to get into this and identify your own caterpillars, you might want to connect with her. And this book on the left is pretty much the classic book on it. But Doug Tallamy has evidence that planting native plants helps birds. He had a grad student, Desiree Narango, who did a study of chickadees, whether they occurred in different yards. And she found that they don't live in yards with less than 70% natives. So there you go. And the connection is the caterpillars. The chickadee needs so many caterpillars to feed its young to breed. So this is a classic study that we should all pay attention to. And I wonder if anybody on this chat, on this presentation, has chickadees in their yard. If you do, be proud of it, because it indicates that you have a good percentage of natives. And how to find out more about native plants. You are all in the Native Plant Society, so you know all about these resources. And National Audubon Society has a Plants for Birds effort, and you can go to this Plants for Birds on their Audubon page, put in your zip code, and it'll pull up a list of plants. And Orange Audubon has been into this forever, and we have one speaker every year and various articles, and we collaborate with the Native Plant Society whenever we can. And one of the projects we did in 2015 and 16, we had yards tours, just showing examples of how you do it, what looks good, and all that. This is my yard. And by the way, on my yard, when we moved in 2003, they had all these foundation plants around the windows, like is traditional in Florida, foundation plants. And you want to remove these because they're not good for birds. Excuse me, they're not good for caterpillars. They're waxy, they're selected to not have caterpillar damage in horticulture. So those non-natives are to be taken out and replaced with natives. And then if you get the caterpillars, just live with them. Be happy you have them, because they're for the birds. And Doug Tallamy in Bringing Nature Home has a list of the best trees in terms of numbers of Lepidoptera species. Oak is at the top, 534 species, then willow, then cherry plum, then birch, which we don't really have in our area, poplar, cottonwood we don't really have, although we have willow, crabapple, and so forth. So he's located near Philadelphia, so the list is not perfectly applicable to us, but it gives us an idea. And now Orange Audubon members and also Tarflower members, Mary Kiem and Randy Snyder, are real all-around naturalists, and they made this flyer, bird and butterfly friendly plants for Central Florida, with input from a lot of experts. And that one I've just recently put online. We mostly had it as a flyer for festivals and stuff, but and Valerie's going to put in the link in the chat if you want to see how to pull this flyer down. And it's pretty good. Okay, well, I'll go through a few plants that are really good, starting with the best, the oaks. It has 534 species of caterpillars. And if you're like me and you're lazy and you're not going to really look for the caterpillars, you can still look for the birds. Where do the birds go? They go to the oaks, particularly in the new leaves in the spring. And that's what we're looking up at, the oaks. That's where the warblers are. The willows also have a lot of caterpillars, and the yellow warbler is a specialist in those, and it doesn't breed here, and it doesn't even winter here. If we have one wintering over, we're lucky. It's really passing through, but anyway, there's an association with the willows, and you're not going to plant willows in your yard, but anyway, it's good to mention that it's at the top of the list. Now, wild cherries is one you could plant in your yard. And of course, we don't like the cherry laurel because it's so aggressive. But we like hog plum. I found that pretty hard to grow. Flatwoods plum and Chickasaw plum is easy to grow, but it's really from farther north. But the one that is just the cream of the crop is the black cherry, wild black cherry, Prunus serratina. And one negative thing is that it has eastern tent caterpillar nests that are commonly found. And some people find them unsightly and problematic. But for birders, it happens that the yellow-billed cuckoo eats tent caterpillars with that strong bill, can go through the tent. And so it's that's a sought-after bird for birders. So I think we'll take the tent caterpillars, no problem. Now, one that we birders really love is Sugarberry, Celtis levigata. And like at the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, there's lots of them, and that's where we look for the warblers. And it's a combination, in the case of the Sugarberry, of the caterpillars on the leaves, and also the berries are just the right size for small birds. And I originally planted the Sugarberry years ago in my yard for the hackberry emperor and the tawny emperor, two beautiful butterflies. And I've never gotten them as far as I have been able to see, but I have noticed that warblers are picking around the Sugarberry leaves. So it's a good one. And then the sable or cabbage palm has the palm leaf skeletonizer on the bottom of the leaf. And of course, this looks very unsightly. What it is the frass, which is the excrement of a caterpillar. But it happens that this particular warbler, the yellow-throated warbler, is always there eating those caterpillars. And that's a plant bird association that you can count on. And I just want to show you how small the moths are for these. These are called Microlepidoptera. They're very little, inconspicuous little moths, and the caterpillars are small. And with the sable palm, cabbage palm, our state tree, the fruit is good for birds too. Particularly the robins love it, but other birds too. Now, I want to mention that butterfly caterpillars are not optimal for birds. And many of you are butterfly gardeners, but you got to think in terms of these are Macrolepidoptera, you have to think in terms of the little ones. Why is this not good for warblers? Well, first of all, warblers, it's too big for a warbler. Maybe a blue jay would get it. And secondly, I mean, the fact that it's all out there in the open with all this bright color tells you that it probably has some distasteful substances and spines and things. So anyway, as a rule, butterfly caterpillars are not optimal for the smaller birds I'm talking about. So summarizing, what are the best trees for caterpillars for Central Florida? The oaks, the cherries, the sugar, hackberries. Well, it's sugarberry. It's not hackberry. That's out of our range. And the sable palm. Okay, I can't see anybody on the Zoom, so I can't see if you have any questions. You can start putting questions in before you forget them in the chat. And just a minute, I'm rounding my story out. I'll be happy to answer them. So where to buy native plants? Don't buy them there at a fruit stand and where they're growing them. The ones they're growing are easy to grow to the point of probably almost invasive. Plus, they're selected to not have insects. They have glossy foliage or maybe hairy foliage or something that prevents the birds from, the caterpillars from growing on them. So you've got to go to a native nursery or one of the better regular nurseries that carry some of the native plants. And of course, this is a long-term effort to try to get the native plants in more commercial nurseries. But I refer you to FAN, and I'm sure you all know this, Florida Association of Native Nurseries. Their website has gotten very informative. You can look for a species and then you can see the range of where it grows, 9A, 9B, so forth. It's very good. And Backyard Biodiversity Day is coming up October 16th at Mead Botanical Garden. That's a project of the Tar Flower chapter of the Native Plant Society and Orange Audubon and some other groups. And I know you traditionally have had plant sales. Back when Jenny was with your chapter, I remember that Pine Lily had plant sales. So I'm sure that you're steering your members to where to buy them. So Doug Tallamy gave a presentation in September last year. And then for us, Orange Audubon was February last year. I'm sorry, September was the year before. So you can go to YouTube and put in Orange Audubon Society and look for Creating a Homegrown National Park, that YouTube recording. And it's a good one. It does a great job. And this is Tallamy's Homegrown National Park website. He doesn't do it himself. He's a professor. He's focused on academia, and he's unusual for an academician that he does do these presentations that are understandable by the public. But he has someone that's working with him to do kind of a outreach thing, and they have started the Homegrown National Park Get on the Map thing, where if you have certain amount of acreage that's in natives, put it on the map and see it bit by bit. We'll get this expanse of native landscape to increase. And that is all I've got at the moment. Any questions?
All right, so there's no questions in the chat right now yet.
Okay.
I had a question in the chat.
Okay.
I guess it's not showing up in the public chat. So Deborah, that was extraordinary. Thank you so much for all of that great information.
You're welcome.
I had a question. Are there some specific native plants that can attract moth caterpillars more than others?
Well, I have to explain, and that's why I brought up Julieta Bambilia and the DPI, the Division of Plant Industry. To really know which ones have the caterpillars, you've got to really look, and you've got to really, and then rear them out, find out what they are. And then we'd have a better database for this area. I actually, when I started getting into this, I contacted Julieta, could you get me connected with the Lepidopterist up there? and see if they would at least give us lists of which species that might occur in Central Florida have the most species of caterpillars. And the Lepidopterus has other commitments and wouldn't want to get involved with such a big project. So I go about it in kind of a lazy way, and I just watch for the birds, which ones the birds go to. And so that's how I came up with this list. And that list that Mary Kiem did, and that flyer that you can download, that's her observations. She's been a native plant landscaper for a long time. But the ones that I found as the best, let's see. I love the sugarberry. And it's hard even to find in nurseries. Okay, so that's Tallamy's list. You just go flip through this book, Bringing Nature Home, and you'll find that list. And that gives you an idea. This is the list from Orange Audubon. So yes, Mary says black cherry, cabbage palm, eastern red cedar, live oak, longleaf pine, red maple, sugarberry, winged elm. Those are the trees. And any of the oaks are great. You just, you know, the new leaves in the spring are just full of caterpillars and full of birds. And of course willows, but we wouldn't plant those. And the wild cherry, I really recommend more people to plant Prunus serratina, black cherry. I guess it has a reputation of being a little brittle. Is that your experience, Karina?
It's brittle, but only with age. I think it's a wonderful tree.
Yes.
It also provides a lot of saplings, so you can create like a whole grove, you know, in a corner of your yard. And to me, the black cherry attracts birds of all sizes, and I think it's one of the best wildlife species that you can plant in your yard. I think it's one of the must-haves.
I agree. I mean, the fruits are sweet, and they're just the right size for a small bird. And the flowers are pretty. Cluster of white flowers. The leaves are nice. And then sugarberry. I mean, it's not a typical one people think of, but we birders just love looking for birds in the sugarberries. They're always there. And then, of course, the cabbage palm. You just got to have the cabbage palm. So those are the top ones. Unless you have another one to suggest, and I'm open for suggestions.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on which oak to use.
Laurel or live. And, you know, if you're in a sandhill dry habitat, try the native ones, turkey oak and so forth. I think they all have a lot of insects on them.
Okay. So it's more about your site and not, oh, there's some like leaf characteristics or something that might make it better larval food for insects.
Well, you know, okay, this is the live oak, you know that it never drops its leaves. Well, it drops its leaves, but only when the new ones have come out. So, and the laurel does the same. So whatever that period is, when it's coming out, the new leaves is the best time for the caterpillars. And it's a good question. And I haven't paid that much attention to the phenology when the new leaves are coming out, but basically spring for all of them. It's when they drop all the catkins and get, you know, messy. Good question.
Thanks.
So we love the cherry. And Karina, have you had any experience with sugarberry?
Yeah, I have. There was in downtown Orlando, there was a very large sugarberry in our neighborhood, and it was always buzzing with insects. And So yeah, you could really tell that it stood out as an insect attractor. And they're beautiful trees. They're really fast growers. If you want a
They
fast
are.
growing shade tree, they're one of the fastest growing trees. And they have their branches get really wide, so it makes for a really nice shade tree.
And yet you can't find them too easily, and even in the in the native nursery trade.
There are some trees that are really hard to find, and Sugarberry is one of them. You really have to look hard at the native nurseries. I think the more people that request them, that native plant nurseries will probably grow them more. This is a deciduous tree, so it has some really nice color in it too, which you rarely find in Central Florida. So that's kind of a nice little perk. And when the leaves come out, they're this, as you can see in the photo, really bright lime green. Then they get a little darker as the season goes on. So it's really an extraordinary looking tree. And what I find most interesting about this tree, other than the fact that it attracts insects and larvae and caterpillars, is that it has a very sculpturesque bark. It has a pitted bark. It actually is like three-dimensional and has little prongs that come out on it. And from a distance, it just looks, very unlike any tree you've ever seen. So to me, I describe it as a very sculpturesque trunk that really goes nicely with any kind of landscape design.
I agree. When I gave this for my Orange Audubon audience, one of my colleagues asked, what about Sugarberry, Beautyberry? How is it for caterpillars? And I hadn't noticed birds going and picking on the leaves. It's a survival food, really, for birds. It's not their favorite. Otherwise, we wouldn't see those purple berries for so long.
Yeah, I have heard from ecologists that the beautyberry is an important fall fruit because you're right, it's not a favorite of the birds. And when everything else has been depleted, the beautyberries are still around, so that it is a nice emergency food for them at the end of the fall season. It's one of the only berries left on, so they do eat it. But I think it's it's a last minute refuge type of thing.
Right, and the leaves of the beautyberry are hairy, and that's the plant's deterrent to the caterpillars, you see. Mm-hmm. So it's more one of those that are specialists for the fruit. And mm-hmm. like the hollies, they are specialists for the fruit, but their leaves are very could you call them waxy? Pretty much. I mean, it's not like easy for a caterpillar to eat those, let's say, dahun holly. So we really have these two different categories of benefit to birds. And really one of the few that overlaps is that sugarberry, because it has a nice fruit as well as a good leaf for caterpillars. But again, I've been a very lazy entomologist. I don't look that carefully at the leaves, and if you get into it, I've given you a couple tips on how to learn more. But you can just watch where you see the birds during migration, because they're getting caterpillars for their own survival as well as any fruit abound during migration, which is right now. Migration has started. And during the breeding season, those few that breed in our area, see which trees they're picking at, and those are going to be your best ones. I can just take one more minute before we close and just let's look at Doug Tallamy's lists again. And so he's counted all those species of caterpillars nationwide in the literature, as well as his own house. So I was going to see if maple was on here. Yeah, maples are on there. Maples aren't bad. Yeah, I think we see birds in maples. All right. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah.
So,
No questions in the chat just yet, unfortunately.
okay, well, anyway, you get the idea that the birds need the caterpillars to feed their nestlings. And so we got to plant the trees that have the caterpillars and live with them. Different concept.
That's right.
Thank you for that eye-opening. A lot of people, I think in the general public, don't realize that, they think they plant a tree or a bush, it could be not even native, and they think that they're, feeding the birds. But, this is an important message. Not only do you need native plants, you need trees and native trees and things to attract caterpillars. So if we want birds to survive, and if we want to see birds in our yards, we've got to plant those trees and create the atmosphere that's good for caterpillars. I don't think people think about caterpillars when they want to attract birds. So I think this is a very important message, Deborah, and I thank you very much for sharing that with us.
And again, I'm an interpreter of Doug Tallamy, and this is a good flyer to get you started. And Valerie's put in the chat the link to it.
Yes.
From Mary. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much for speaking for us, Deborah. And yes, appreciate your time and effort preparing the presentation. So hope you have an awesome Thursday night.
Okay, you all too.